let's debate. President Trump heads to the G20 summit in Japan after a new exchange of letters with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And in case you missed it, the president's long promoted deportation raids were abruptly delayed. He gave Congress a 2-week deadline to somehow reach a deal. So let's tune out the ground noise, as Joe says, and focus on the signal. Here's Joe's take. The president pulled back from a tragic escalation with Iran, and a tragedy continues to unfold in South Texas, where the president's immigration policies have children living like animals in U.S. custody.
So, Mike, let's keep that up for a second. Put that back up for 1 second. So much going on this weekend. The president's interview with Chuck Todd, and of course, we're still following up on George Stephanopoulos' interview and just tweets, things going back and forth. But really, if we're looking at what people are going to be talking about or what's going to matter in 5 years significantly, I do think, first of all, the president pulling back and not starting a war with Iran, obviously extraordinarily important. But secondly, children being treated like terrorists at an interrogation camp. Lights on 24 hours a day.
Cold floors, having aluminum no hygiene
on top of them, no toothbrushes, no soap. 7, 8-year-olds having to take care of 2, 3-year-olds who don't have diapers or walking around in dirty diapers. This is deplorable, and I just wonder what the president and the Republican members of Congress are going to do about it. I mean, there have to be Republican senators that have children and grandchildren who actually understand that it doesn't matter what color these children's skin is. They're just as precious in God's sight as their own children and grandchildren.
Joe, every day for many, many weeks now, we read anecdotal reports, factual news reports coming from the border, coming from various detention camps. That's what they are, detention camps, holding children from 4 or 5 years of age to 12, 13 and up. But this past weekend seemed to set a new low, a horrific low. I think that you read the same piece that I did.
The New Yorker piece.
The New Yorker piece, an interview with one lawyer who was there with a team of lawyers inspecting facilities. And it is not the United States of America.
It is not the United States.
Here it is. Let's show you the details. A team of lawyers is sending a warning about the conditions inside a Border Patrol facility in Clint, Texas. The attorneys say hundreds of migrant children who have been separated from their parents or family members are being held in dirty, neglectful, and dangerous conditions. According to The New Yorker, the lawyers interviewed more than 50 children at the facilities in Clint in order to monitor government compliance with the Flores settlement, which mandates that children must be held in safe and sanitary conditions and moved out of Border Patrol custody without unnecessary delays. The conditions the lawyers found were shocking. Flu and lice outbreaks were going untreated, and children were filthy, sleeping on cold floors and taking care of each other because of the lack of attention from guards. Some of them had been in the facility for weeks. Just last week, a Justice Department lawyer went before a panel of judges to argue that the government shouldn't be required to provide detained migrant children with soap, toothbrushes, and showers at Customs and Border Protection detention facilities.
It's within everybody's common understanding that, if you don't have a toothbrush, if you don't have soap, if you don't have a blanket, it's not safe and sanitary. Wouldn't everybody agree to that? Do you agree to that?
Well, I think there's fair reason to find that those things may be part of safe and sanitary.
Maybe are a part. What do you say maybe? You mean there are circumstances when a person doesn't need to have a toothbrush, toothpaste, and soap for days?
Well, I think in CBP custody, it's frequently intended to be much shorter term. So it may be that for a shorter term stay in CBP custody that some of those things may not be required.
Aren't toothbrushes and blankets and medicine, basic conditions for kids, aren't they a part of how the United States of America, the Trump administration, treats children?
Well, of course they are, Jake.
Well, the lawyer was arguing the
I
opposite.
can't speak to what that lawyer was saying. It's one of the reasons we asked for more bed space.
We have money to give toothpaste and soap and blankets to these kids in this facility in El Paso County right now. We do.
Of course we do.
So why aren't we?
My point is, it's all a part of the appropriations process. Congress needs to provide additional support to deal with the crisis at our southern border.
No, actually, Mr.
Jonathan
Vice
Lemire,
President.
that's just a lie.
You're pathetic.
Mike Pence is lying about children living in torturous positions right there. Mike Pence, who claims to be a Christian,
Chortling.
a devout Christian, and he uses it, and I'm sure he is. I'm not questioning his faith, but he uses it as a political badge of honor. Mike should read the Gospels again and see what Jesus says about the treatment of little children. You can start at Luke 17:2. Something about millstones being hung around people's neck. You've got to explain to us, what does the administration think they are gaining by allowing children to walk around with lice and walk around without diapers, and 8-year-olds having to take care of 2 or 3-year-olds? What does the administration think they gain from that?
Yeah, I mean, this is hard to watch. It's hard to listen to. And it's the New Yorker, the New York Times, my colleagues, Associated Press, the last week or so have done some extraordinary reporting about the conditions at those facilities. And as you said, at 7 and 8-year-olds suddenly being forced to take care of 5-month-olds who they don't even know. They're just but because no one else was going to do that. Soiled diapers, shirts covered with mucus.
So what does the administration think they gain by letting these children live like dogs?
I mean, they, of course, will, as you heard the vice president say, they'll dispute that categorization, but it's clear that's what's happening. And it goes back to the president and his stance about zero tolerance at the border. He's saying that technically families are not separated anymore. But what they're doing is they're in these facilities longer than by regulations. They're only supposed to be there 2 or 3 days before they move on to HHS custody. That is not happening. People are, including children, are forced to live in squalor much longer than that. It is part of, they say, a negotiating tactic. It's pressure to get more money from the Democrats. They're trying to make some sort of congressional deal. But what it also is, it's the president looking tough. It's the president who still feels that this issue, immigration, the border, does
the president think that letting 2-year-old children walk around with lice and without diapers, does he think that helps him politically?
The president thought that child separations at the border a year ago helped him politically, so it stands to reason there's at least some degree that could here now. They certainly think
Republican senators, and I'm dead serious, I know a lot of them also men and women of faith, do they think that this is permissible with the Christian faith they claim and also being members of the United States Senate? Do they think this is permissible?
I guess I would answer it this way. None of them have spoken up about it yet.
Wow.
Mike, there was an important point in that hearing, the Ninth Circuit, that we didn't get to, where the DOJ attorney said that, well, they're supposed to be staying here for short periods of time. And then the follow-up was from the judge in the center. He said, yeah, but we're not talking about that here. They have overstayed their 72-hour stays. They're there
By a long shot.
By a long shot, and they're living in squalor. They're living like animals. They're living like dogs because of the United States of America.
Yeah, you know, there are 2 important points here, and people should wonder and ask themselves, can they imagine, can they think of any other past political administration, any other presidency, where the response would not have been immediate to children in need like this? And the other aspect of it is, don't ever look at our foreign aid budget and the amounts of money that we dispense to children around the world and ignore these children being held hostage.
Well, no, this is
in our
something
own
that can be
country.
fixed today. So at this point, you can look at this somewhat as purposeful by this government.
Well,
Julia Ainsley, you're flagging that these kids are staying here a lot longer than 72 hours, the minimum, or I guess the norm that it's supposed to be. How long are they staying there in these conditions?
Well, when we got the numbers broken down last month, Mika, it looked like they were staying on average of 110 hours, so past the 72 hours. Now we're past that. Now we're talking about children staying there sometimes over a week. There was a case of a child who had the flu, was near death, had 106-degree fever, and had to stay in those conditions for over a week before he could be taken to a place where he could get better care. So what's happening is CBP is using that same argument that we saw from the vice president, that it is a matter of funding from Congress so that we can move them to better places. But that argument simply doesn't stand when you have children who are in those situations. It is a reality, and it is such a simple solution to provide them with basic care. Yes, it's true that these facilities were not built for long term. They were not built to handle children. They were built for a mainly male, single adult male population. But we're in that reality now, and we have been for some time. So the question is, why aren't there better policies in place? And especially if you think about that, CBP had deaths of migrant children in their custody for the first time in December, the first time in over a decade, and now there have been 2 other deaths, so and countless others that were very close to death. So the question is, why can't there be policies in place that move beyond this funding? If the reality is we have capacity problems, then you deal with how you alleviate the suffering in the meantime.
So
Yes.
what does the administration gain from this? It's what, again, I keep getting at does Donald Trump think that having babies live in squalor helps him politically? What are you hearing there? I'm sorry, this is a sort of thing that, at least when I was in Washington, you could fix this in a day.
Well, I think what Jonathan said was spot on, that he's seeing this as a negotiation tactic, that they think that the worse they can show the conditions being at the border, the more Congress will be moved to provide funding. And when they provide funding, they're asking for detention space across the board. So when the president teases things like mass ICE raids, it's not clear, is that detention space going to be used to alleviate the suffering of children, or is it going to be used in order to hold immigrants who are on their way to be deported from this country? And so right now, this negotiation tactic is what they're saying they are using, and that they want more capacity, that detention space will actually alleviate some of this suffering. But you're right, it's not, I don't think that message is being received. And I will say, when I go to DHS on this, they say, look, there's a lot of autonomy across the border. There's been an inspector general flag on this, but it is not that immediate 3-alarm fire that you're talking about.
Are these separated children, or are they family units? What's the story there?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I think this is getting a little confused. Now, some of the lawyers who went there said that they did see children who had been separated, but mainly from family members, and that's not necessarily parents. What I think a lot of people don't know is that if a child crosses with a grandparent or an adult sibling, that does not count as a legal guardian. Unless you cross a border with your biological parent or legal guardian, you're considered unaccompanied, which explains a lot of why we see such young children that are deemed unaccompanied. We can't imagine a toddler making this journey on their own. So they're coming, what is deemed unaccompanied, separated from people who are their family members, and then held in this facility. What happened in El Paso, that Clint facility that's described in the New Yorker piece, is that they, for some reason, decided to put over 235 children in one facility that already had a maximum of about 300. Children are some of the hardest people to care for because of all of these conditions. So they were taken from family members, not necessarily parents, and then put in this condition where there were very few adults to care for them, let alone medically trained personnel.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, if Mike Pence says the government cannot afford toothbrushes and soap and diapers, I will tell you.
He says it's an appropriations issue, Joe.
Well, Mike, if you don't have the money in a federal government that runs a $22 trillion federal debt, we'll take care of it on Morning Joe. So I'll make some phone calls today, and we'll have a fundraiser from the Morning Joe community, and we'll buy toothbrushes and soap and diapers. So we did it before on my last show, Hurricane Katrina, because that was such a deplorable response.
But this is a deplorable act. This is disgusting what's happening.
Yeah, so
this is a stain on America's legacy.
Like I said, it's very simple. Mike, Donald, if you don't have enough money to get soap for children or if you did diapers for 2-year-old kids, we'll go ahead and start a fundraising drive here, and we'll get it down to South Texas. So I'll make phone calls. We'll call around. If you can't do it with your $5 trillion budget, and all the money you're giving to Saudi Arabia, and all the support you've given Saudi Arabia to start a war in Yemen, we'll take care of it here. How sad, how pathetic. So, I remember during the Cold War, you would hear Soviets always talking about internal policies. How dare the United States judge the Soviet Union when we had the race problems that we had in the country, we had the human rights abuses that we had in our own country. You look at a situation like this, and I don't know if Mike Pence understands this or not, while he's chuckling. This is exactly what leaders in the Philippines, in Turkey, in Russia, in Iran, in all the countries that consider themselves enemies of the United States of America, this is a dream for them, because they can say, oh, you don't like how we're treating people? Well, at least we don't torture 2-year-olds on our borders.
You know, one of the most important things with a country's relationship to the world is not simply what a State Department does. It's the example you set. It's who we are. And when we had things like civil rights, the good news is when we showed we could self-correct, that actually enhanced America's reputation around the world. Things like Charlottesville set it back. This obviously sets it back, in part the way you said. It reinforces the sense that people have license to do what it is they want to do. But there's, I just came back from China on Friday. There's a sense that China, in a lot of the world, has a better model. It's an authoritarian system, but they don't see images like this. Now, China's putting over 1 million people in concentration camps, I understand. But it makes it much harder for us to compete for the hearts and minds of people around the world when they see this going on. Let's make one other point. If you're worried about the abuse of asylum policy, which the administration argues that people come into the United States, they request asylum, and then they can spend months or even years while that adjudication is taking place, then why don't we send hundreds, if not thousands, of retired judges or administrative law judges and get a very quick way of determining asylum? We can send them to the border. You can't have a policy that's totally divorced from practice. If you want to have a policy that's tougher at the border, you've got to put into place the mechanisms. What this is the result when there's a gap between this desire to look tough and the reality we can't take care of the people who are affected. We've got to treat the people better, but we've also got to put into place the mechanisms for administering the policy.
All right, and Julia, finally, the ICE raids canceled. Tell us what happened.
That was pretty abrupt, wasn't it, Mika? So what I'm hearing from sources is that there are a number of reasons. One, that this was leaked, which is really interesting because we all knew of the plans first from the president himself. In general, when a plan of a raid is leaked, a lot of times they will cancel it because they don't want the people targeted to be prepared. And in this case, we know on Friday it was very easy. Many media organizations, including NBC, got the plans and got the list of the cities all around the same time. So they're blaming that on media leaks, but we have to say it was pretty transparent. Didn't take a lot of digging for that. And then also the fact that whether or not they had the capacity to detain all these people was in question. I've talked to some ICE officials who say, yes, there was a plan. We could have had capacity. But then I've talked to others who said that the majority of these immigrants were families, and you have to hold families in separate detention places than you would single adults. And so there wasn't enough capacity to deal with the amount of detention space you would need to hold those families before they're deported. So it could have been a logistical issue, too. I think one thing is clear is that this was not a negotiation tactic. I think that was sort of a reason that was invented after these were canceled, but that was not the big discussion that they had when they decided to call off these raids, that this would somehow pressure Democrats and bring them to the table.
So, Jonathan, the president made news with a couple of quick tweets over the weekend, and this was one of them. Any insight as to why?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that, of course, they have been talking about. Something they do want to do. This is part of the president's tougher immigration policy in these raids. But it was a few things. I mean, Julia's exactly right. There was, first of all, there was logistical and capacity issues, and they didn't really think there was real doubt they were going to be able to pull this off. It is amusing, though, that leaks are blamed, considering the president himself tweeted out repeatedly that this was going to happen. So he himself was the biggest leaker on this one.
Ship of state leaks from the top.
Okay. All right, Julia Ainsley, thank you very much. And still.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.